Carnarvon, Western Australia, a coastal town of 5,500 people at the mouth of the Gascoyne River, 10 hours north of Perth, red earth, blue ocean, the kind of place where locals know each other and children play outside until dark. Thursday, October 15th, 2021. A young family pulls into the Blowholes campsite at Point Quobba, 80 kilometres north of Carnarvon, a place both parents had loved since childhood, a seaside playground. They set up their new tent, they have dinner, they put their 4-year-old daughter to bed. Her name is Cleo. At 2:30 a.m, Cleo wakes up asking for water. Her mother Ellie gives her a drink and tucks her back in. By 6 a.m, Cleo is gone. Her sleeping bag is gone too. The tent zip has been opened to a height only reachable from the outside. What follows is 18 days that brings an entire nation to its knees. This is the story of Cleo Smith. Cleo Smith lived with her mother Ellie Smith and her stepfather Jake Giddon and her baby sister in Carnarvon. By every account, she was a ball of sunshine. Ellie described her as vibrant, loving, full of energy, a little girl who loved ballet and horse riding and being outside. The family had set off for the Blowholes campsite for a weekend away on the evening of October 15th, 2021. Both Ellie and Jake had spent their childhoods swimming in the fish-filled lagoon there. It was a happy place, a safe place. They arrived at around 7 p.m, set up camp, had dinner, put Cleo into bed in the family tent. At 2:30 a.m, Cleo stirred and asked for water. Ellie gave her a drink. Cleo settled back to sleep. The family slept. They never heard a thing. The sound of crashing waves and clanging metal shacks from the campsite masked everything. At 6 a.m. on Friday, October 16th, 2021, Ellie woke up. The tent was wide open. Cleo was gone. Her sleeping bag was gone too. Ellie told police later she would never leave us. She would never leave the tent. The family searched the immediate area, found nothing. At 6:23 a.m, they called the police. A police car arrived at 7:10 a.m. Within hours, one of the largest search operations in Western Australian history had begun. Horses, helicopters, drones, police divers, an army of rescue personnel scouring inhospitable terrain along the Gascoyne coast. Behind the scenes, teams of detectives trawled through phone records, satellite data, and CCTV footage. On October 20th, police were still publicly describing the case as a search and rescue operation. Then, on October 21st, 5 days after Cleo disappeared, Western Australia Premier Mark McGowan announced what everybody had feared. Cleo had been abducted. A $1 million reward was offered for information. Task Force Rhodia was launched. More than 100 officers, including the Australian Federal Police, led by Superintendent Rod Wild, bounty hunters descended on Carnarvon from across the country, hoping to claim the reward. But there was no sign of Cleo, no sign of her sleeping bag, no sign of who had taken her. For 18 days, Ellie Smith stood in the front of the cameras with her eyes red and her voice breaking. She made appeal after appeal, pleading for her daughter's safe return. She said she and Jake were too frightened to sleep. They watched the same spot at the Blowholes campsite every day, feeling completely empty and broken, staying at the place that caused them so much pain, hoping their little girl would be located. The public scrutiny was relentless. Online forums accused Ellie of harming her own child. Keyboard detectives with no evidence pointed fingers at the family. She was completely innocent. What nobody knew at the time, what made everything even more sickening, was that when Ellie was making those desperate public appeals on social media, The man who had taken her daughter had befriended her on the same platform. He was watching her grief in real time. His name was Terence Darrell Kelly. Terence Darrell Kelly was 36 years old. He lived in a nondescript state housing duplex in South Carnarvon, just 4 kilometres from the Smith family home. He had no connection to the family whatsoever. His life had been shaped by trauma from the very beginning. Born in Wickham in the Pilbara to Indigenous Australian parents who were alcoholics, given alcohol in his baby bottles before being placed in care at the age of 2 with his maternal aunt Penny Walker. He had speech and hearing issues, refused to wear hearing aids because other kids would bully him. By 12, he was bedwetting, suicidal, and hospitalized. Expelled from high school for violent and disruptive behavior, beaten by his father when he briefly returned to live with him. A psychiatric assessment described him as having a severely fragile, disturbed, and fragmented identity, paranoid schizophrenia, complex PTSD, severe personality disorder, depression, anxiety, and possible fetal alcohol syndrome. He had previously served prison time for burglary and aggravated burglary. Released in 2017, he returned to live with his aunt, Penny. When Penny died in 2020, he continued to live in her public housing property alone. Inside that house was something deeply disturbing. Dozens of Bratz dolls, some still in their original packaging. He made social media posts featuring photographs and videos of himself with the dolls. He had also created fake Facebook pages for fictitious children he had invented, pretending they were real, communicating with them, building a fantasy life as a father. When police later questioned him about these children, he insisted they were real. Criminologists described Terence Kelly as a black swan case, someone who had developed a warped fantasy of parenthood, of having a little girl to dress up and play with. The judge at his sentencing said she believed it was drugs, not delusion alone, that pushed him to act on it. On the night of October 15, 2021, Kelly drove to the Blowholes campsite. He was high on methamphetamine. He had gone there to steal a handbag. Instead, he took a child. Kelly told police later exactly what he had done. Emboldened by the methamphetamine in his veins, sometime between 2:40 a.m. and 4:40 a.m., he approached the Smith family's tent. He unzipped the front, opening it to a height only reachable from the outside. He reached in. He scooped up 4-year-old Cleo, sleeping bag and all, and he walked back to his car and drove away into the darkness. He took her into his house in South Carnarvon. He locked her in a room. There was a mattress on the floor. He turned the bathroom radio on loudly to drown out her cries. For 18 days, he left her alone in that house for hours at a time when he went about his life. He attended meetings. He went shopping. He did arts and craft activities. He visited relatives. When he was home, he described smacking her and roughing her up when she was being, in his words, bossy, when she asked for chocolate. He tried to restrain her hands and feet and mouth with sticky tape. He tried to tie her into a chair. He told the police his attempts had failed because, he said, she was a bit of a fighter. A 4-year-old girl, alone in a locked room, crying for her mum, being restrained by a stranger twice her size, and she fought back. At some point during the 18 days, Cleo heard a radio in the house. She heard her name. She turned to Kelly and said, "They're saying my name." The key that broke the case was a car. In the early hours of October 16th, a vehicle had been seen leaving the Blowholes campsite at speed. Police made a public plea for information about that car on October 25th. Behind the scenes, detectives were working through overlapping layers of data: phone records, satellite information, CCTV footage, building a picture piece by piece. By November 3rd, they had their man. At 11:24 p.m., police located Kelly. Less than 2 hours later, at 12:46 a.m. on November 4th, 2021, detectives from Task Force Rhodia broke down the door of a locked house in South Carnarvon. They moved through the rooms. In one of the rooms, they found a little girl, alone, playing with a toy car. Her hair had been cut. It had been dyed a different color. One of the officers crouched down. The little girl looked up at him, and she said 4 words that went around the world. "My name is Cleo." That moment was captured on police body camera footage and went viral globally. WA Police Commissioner Chris Dawson broke down in tears when he heard the news. He called it one of the most remarkable days in policing in Western Australian history. Ellie received a phone call at 1 a.m. "We've got someone here that wants to speak to you." Cleo was reunited with her family that same morning. She was unharmed. She was alive. Australia exhaled. Kelly was charged with forcibly taking a child under 16. He pleaded guilty. At his sentencing in Perth District Court on April 5, 2023, the full details of Cleo's ordeal were made public for the first time. Chief Judge Julie Wager said, "The fear and distress caused to them over those 18 days was immeasurable. The child's life and that of her family has been permanently impacted, and that impact will never go away." A psychological report read out in court said Kelly felt euphoria when he took Cleo because he could finally fulfill his fantasy of having a little girl to dress up and play with. Ellie sat in that courtroom and heard every detail. Afterwards, she said, "It's disgusting to hear that someone is capable of doing that to a child, let alone our child who is clearly so innocent. She is such a ball of sunshine. It's just heartbreaking. Someone's tired our child, someone's hurt our kid. We are angry and we'll always be angry." Kelly was sentenced to 13 years and 6 months in prison, eligible for parole after 11 and a half years. He appealed his sentence. In September 2024, that appeal was dismissed. He will serve his full term. The first week Cleo was home was the hardest. Ellie said they had to have all the doors open and all the lights on just for Cleo to sleep. Even then, she woke up screaming, nightmare after nightmare, after being through the nightmare. Ellie said later, "As a parent, you want to make sure that they stay as a child for as long as they can." She lost that. That was taken from her. The family moved away from Carnarvon. They took a 4-month road trip around Australia with Cleo and her baby sister Isla. "We never really travelled," Ellie said, "even though it was scary and it was something we needed to do. Everywhere we went, it was so beautiful. It just made us realise how beautiful Australia really is. We were able to find ourselves again after trauma." Ellie and Jake married in 2023. Cleo started school. She loves ballet. She is learning tap. She wants to do horse riding. In 2024, she won a gold medal at her first gymnastics competition. She is a big sister to little Isla. She celebrated her 7th birthday surrounded by her family. In her victim impact statement, Ellie and Jake asked for one thing: privacy, space, and an opportunity for their little girl to do whatever it takes to be able to lead her best life in the future. Criminologist Xanthi Malay said she had never heard of a case quite like it. 3/4 of child abductions are carried out by family members. When an opportunistic stranger takes a child, they typically want to quickly dispose of the evidence. Children taken by strangers are usually killed within hours. Cleo Smith was held captive for 18 days. She fought back against a man twice her size. She heard her name on the radio and told her captor exactly what was happening. And when police finally broke down that door and found her alone in a locked room, playing with a toy car, she looked up and told them exactly who she was. "My name is Cleo." Those 4 words made an entire nation cry. I remember where I was when I heard she had been found. Every Australian does. Cleo Smith is 8 years old now. She is loved. She is safe. She is exactly where she should be. This has been The Unknown Files. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Unknown Files. If you like solved and unsolved cases just like this, please subscribe to this channel and don't forget to like this video. Thank you.